Welcome back to the new adventures of the monad. When people think of our distant past, they first alight on Atlantis. But lurking in the background is this more mysterious civilization / continent called Lemuria. Some people think it coexisted with Atlantis. Others think it predated it. Both scenarios are correct, but there is a sequential element to these two root races, and we will now start to unravel the story. During the third root race, the Lemurians, known in Hindu literature as the Davanas, the process of repeating the first 3 rounds was continued. All that happened in the middle of the third round was repeated in this third root race. This involved the materialization of humanity into the physical plane and their separation into sexes. Before we study the process in detail, however, we should first consider the physical conditions of the Earth itself. The Earth has been slowly changing. According to the secret doctrine, the Great Mother travailed under the waves. She travailed harder for the third (race), and her waist and navel appeared above the water. It was the belt, the sacred Himavat, which stretches around the world. I like the idea of waist and navel, but can't quite picture it. The sea to the south of Plaksha, also known as Hyperborean, covered what is now the Gobi Desert, Tibet, and Mongolia. And from the southern waters of this sea, the Himalayan chain emerged. Slowly land appeared from the foot of the Himalayas to Sri Lanka, Sumatra, Australia, Tasmania, and Easter Island. Looking westward, we see Madagascar and part of Africa. Included also were Norway, Sweden, East and West Siberia, and Kamchatka. This vast continent was Lemuria, the cradle of the race in which human intelligence was to appear. Its ancient name is Shalmali. The equatorial continent of Lemuria at the time of its greatest expansion nearly girdled the globe, extending from the site of the present Cape Verde Islands a few miles from the coast of Sierra Leone in a southeasterly direction through Africa, Australia, the Society Islands, and all the intervening seas, to a point a few miles distant from a great island continent about the size of present South America, which spread over the remainder of the Pacific Ocean and included Cape Horn and parts of Patagonia. How such a description correlates with our current knowledge of plate tectonics, I don't know. One thing is possible is that the movement of the continental plates may have been more dramatic in the past, especially in times of giant upheavals. In the course of ages, this vast continent undergoes many disruptions and is broken up into great islands. Norway sinks and disappears. Starting over 20 million years ago, a great outburst of volcanic fire erupted. Chasms opened in the ocean floor, and Lemuria as a continent disappeared, leaving only fragments such as Australia and Madagascar with Easter Island, submerged and then again re-uplifted. The destruction of Lemuria was brought about principally by fire, through volcanic action. It was raked by the burning ashes and the red-hot dust from large numbers of volcanoes. The Lemurians met their doom chiefly by fire and suffocation, unlike the next race, the Atlanteans, who perished mostly by drowning. Another contrast between the destruction of Lemuria and that of Atlantis was that while 4 great catastrophes completed the destruction of Atlantis, Lemuria was eaten away by internal fires, the volcanic action being incessant. For this reason, a single date for the demise of Lemuria is not given. It started to disintegrate from its very inception. About the middle of the life of Lemuria, there took place a great change of climate, which brought the demise of the remnants of the second root race together with their progeny, the early sub-race of the third root race. It says in the secret doctrine The axle of the wheel tilted. The sun and moon shone no longer over the heads of that portion of the sweat-born. People knew snow, ice, frost, and men, plants, and animals were dwarfed in their growth. The gorgeous hues of the tropic faded away before the breath of the Ice King. The polar days and nights of 6 months began. For a while the remnants of Plaksha, Hyperborea, and a greatly reduced population. The imperishable sacred lands, however, continued to exist as before. Why? Because it was etheric, not physical. I was thinking, this thing about the tilting that's mentioned by Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, that implies that somehow the earth possibly tilted on its axis. This, we know, has occurred simply because we see magnetization of rock, and then this magnetization suddenly changes, implying that somehow the earth has moved on its axis. And here Blavatsky talks about that. And this would explain why you suddenly have this lush vegetation and suddenly everything becomes frigid. That's why Hyperborea, in our minds, you could say in modern times, is thought of as a very cold place. Yet, as I said in the last presentation, it was described as being very lush. Turning now to the root race itself, with its 7 distinct sub-races, we shall discover that the many schemes of reproduction characteristic of the third round reappear in this third root race and run simultaneously in various parts of the earth. The bulk of the population passed through the successive stages and eventually became oviparous or egg-bearing. It seems that the various schemes of reproduction were suitable for monads at different stages of evolution, the earlier ones being kept in operation for backward monads to inhabit after the bulk of people had passed beyond them. These changes began some 164 million years ago, according to Ledbetter, and occupied 5.5 to 6 million years. Physical bodies changing very slowly and reversions frequently taking place. Moreover, the original number was small and the time needed for multiplication. Alternative timelines have been presented by researchers that seem more feasible, placing the start of the third root race some 20 million years ago. What is more important to take into account when studying the evolution of the root races is precisely that, their evolution. What was going on? How did it start and where did it come from? In our study of the chains, rounds and globes, I hope a consistent pattern can be seen by the viewer. The separation of the sexes took place by the third subrace of the third root race. When the oviparous types of reproduction became stable, the egg was preserved within the feminine body and reproduction assumed the form which still persists. While the Lemurian bodies were composed of gases, liquids and solids, just like they are today, at first the gases and liquids predominated because their vertebrate structure had not solidified into bones like ours. They could not therefore stand erect. Their bones in fact were pliable as the bones of infants are now. It was not until the middle of the Lemurian period that humanity developed a solid bone structure. This could partially explain why there is no material evidence for their existence today. Let us now look at the subrace of the third root race. In the first subrace, the method of reproduction was by extrusion of soft, viscid bodies known as sweat. It was from here that the term sweat-born was derived. There was very little differentiation of the sexes that was visible externally. The consciousness of the first subrace displayed a manifestation of unity, being in touch with Atma, in brackets 45, plane only. As was mentioned in the preceding presentation, the Bahashards from Globe D on the moon chain had brought into the first race and second races certain backward entities who served as special coaches for the more backward entities in those two races. Some of these benefit from the coaching and were brought into the first subrace of the third root race as its lowest type. They were egg-headed with an eye at the top of their head, a roll-like sausage representing a forehead and projecting lower jaw. The egg-headed types persisted for a very long time, but evolved over time in later subraces. Traces of these early Lemurians were found even in the 7th subrace. If you look at cranial development in some African tribes today, you can see the vestigial reminders of this Lemurian subrace. After them, either in this subrace or a little later, the exact point is obscure, a very considerable number of monads who had developed their basket-work causal bodies into complete causal bodies on globe C began to incarnate. These monads took the lead in the Earth's humanity, preparing the way for more advanced monads who were soon to arrive from the moon chain. It was the group that had fought the watermen, terrible and bad, on globe C. In the 2nd subrace, the exuded bodies hardened. The secret doctrine tells us the drops became hard and round. The sun warmed it, the moon cooled it and shaped it. The wind fed it until its ripeness. The soft bodies thus gradually became encrusted. The ovum, which from that time to the present day is the natal home of the germ cell that develops into a fetus. Within the egg, the forms gradually evolved into androgynous creatures distinctly human in type. These are called sons of passive yoga because they seem so distracted from the world around them. Rather like children today with their iPhones. The consciousness of the 2nd subrace exhibited a duality, being in touch with Atma Buddhi 45 and 46. You can see here how this subrace is repeating what happened in the 2nd round. In The Pedigree of Man by Annie Besant, the first 2 subraces are spoken of collectively as the early 3rd. They were born under Shukra or Venus, and under this influence they evolved into hermaphrodites. The races are separated under Lohitanga or Mars, who is the embodiment of karma, the passion nature. There is not a lot more that is known about these first 2 subraces of the 3rd root race. We will now start to look at the 3rd subrace, where something crucial happened and is accompanied by an even more significant event. See you in the next presentation. Thank you.